is God sending us proximity lessons? Why do we need these proximity lessons? These things that are right up on us. We have to learn to appreciate the contradictions of both the flesh and spirit living in the same body, because the contradiction pushes us from the inside and has the effect of forcing us to prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The proximity lesson causes us to push out. That's why when Jesus gave the parable of the thorns or the weeds and the wheat, it's a proximity lesson. Remember, in the parable, he says he went out and sowed some seeds. And then the servant came back and said, but master, overnight some weeds grew up right next to it and they were all tangled together. What do you want us to do about it? And what did he say? He said, let them both grow together. Proximity lesson. Amen. God puts things in our proximity because he needs you to know how to push out, how to maintain your faith, how to stand your spiritual ground, how to be a light in darkness. There's darkness all around you in proximity, but you are the light of the world. Amen. A city that sits on a hill. Yes, you are. You that thing. Listen, a saint has to be careful. A saint has to stay on guard. Keep their guards up at all times, or risk being knocked out by the barrage of assaults from the flesh that are in proximity. It was St. Augustine who said, I cannot stop the birds from flying around my head. He's shooing at them. Quit, stop. But what I can do is stop them from landing and making a nest. Today's outline offers an approach for saints to neutralize the power of an uninvited thought, suggesting this: that we first recognize the uninvited, scrutinize what is unwelcomed, and euthanize what is unholy. Somebody help me here. Can we recognize the uninvited? Can y'all say that with me? We've got to recognize the uninvited. Recognition of what is uninvited is half the battle. This is important because you and I must be able to disaggregate your human nature from your holy nature. Amen. Are you with me here? When an uninvited thought walks into the temple of your spiritual home, you need to assert who is in control and the current occupant, and who's the current occupant of the resident from the former evicted occupant that's trying to get in. You see, the holy resident and the human resident. The human used to be there. The flesh used to be there. But now there is a holy occupant there. And he wants to come back in. I'm reminded my Deborah's family, they have some property in Las Vegas. And, you know, they had to go through that eviction process. Can I borrow an amen, Sister Fisher? It was a tough eviction process. They had to put new locks on the doors and board things up. And do you know what I'm about to say, right? Do you know that those folks went back and still figured out a way to get back in there? And I'm telling you today that when you got saved, when you came to Jesus, when you said, I've been born again, when you said I had a changed mind and I'm walking up the King's Highway, when you said that I moved from my old house and I'm in a new house. Don't you know that just because you said that doesn't mean that that old resident don't try to come in and squat? You ever see somebody face pressed up against the window and their nose be flat and they looking in trying to see something? That's what the old resident is doing. He got his nose pressed up against the window, looking at you, trying to see if you gonna slip, saying stuff from the outside, uninvited thoughts. I ain't asked you to be screaming out there. You outside. Me and Jesus on the inside. But don't you take your fool self, like some of us have, and go over to the window and start trying to talk to him. Let him stay out there with his nose pressed up. Matter of fact, I'm closing the curtains. Romans chapter 7 verse 21 culminates Paul's dissecting and discovery process regarding his human nature and his holy nature. It's the culmination. He says, I find then a law. When he says I find, he says, okay, this is my discovery. I find then a law. When I would do good, in proximity, evil is present with me. When I would do good. And that was his discovery. Paul's statement is a recognition and discovery. So once we recognize what it is, he also discovers. Now listen, what had Paul recognized and discovered? Paul discovered that evil is always in proximity. And let me be clear, evil is not in power, but it's in proximity. We got to remember that part. Evil is not in power, it's in proximity. But it will. It can get to you. If you ain't careful. Uninvited thoughts are the product of our flesh lusting against our spirit. Galatians chapter 5 verse 17 says, for the flesh lusts against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary one to one another, so that you do not the things that you wish. Yeah. They have no business being inside our spiritual home unless you have decided that you're going to invite them in.